Welcome. So today is where we'll discuss study abroad affordability and a little bit about financial aid. I just want to let you all know that this session is being recorded. If you have any questions, though, I encourage you to actually drop them into the chat or save them for the question period at the end. I do intend for this session to last about 20 minutes and then maybe 5 minutes or so for questions. But I'm going to go ahead and get us started. So my name is Craig R. Harmlin. I work in the Office of International Affairs. I work in study abroad. I advise on a number of programs, but one of my passions is study abroad affordability and study abroad access and scholarships. And so that's a little bit about what I want to talk about today. And also I have another session on scholarships if you're interested. So let's get started with our agenda. Just to give you kind of a sense of what I plan on covering today, I want to give you a better sense of kind of how study abroad affordability works with a lot of other concepts that you may want to kind of keep in mind. So we want to understand kind of what costs are for study abroad, understand the cost of attendance, as well as maybe how it compares to studying at UC Merced. We'll talk about terms, providers, and programs and how those impact affordability, as well as some scholarship considerations. But won't dig too deeply into scholarships just because that I want to set aside for a session specifically on scholarships. And we could spend a lot of time talking about scholarships at another point, but that's not really what this particular session is intended for today. But before launching into the rest of the agenda, I actually want to drop a quick poll. So I want to ask just a few questions. So I want to get a sense of how soon you're thinking about studying abroad, maybe your destination preference, as well as what you're hoping to achieve. Hopefully you can all see the poll and participate. Maybe about 30 seconds more to complete the poll. Okay, it looks like everybody is participating. So let me share the results from the poll. So it looks like most of you are thinking about fall 21, which is great. Summer 21 is also right on the horizon for some of these, especially scholarship opportunities and thinking about kind of planning, but most likely you've already actually submitted your application if you fall into one of these categories. If you're thinking about spring 22 and beyond, we have a bit more time to kind of pivot and adjust and take a look at kind of what's going to be the most viable options if choosing a program is going to impact affordability and access. Some of you want Europe, some of you East Asia, and then the rest Latin America. I'll tell you that studying abroad, especially outside of Europe, especially outside of Australia and New Zealand, can also impact maybe scholarship potential, but sometimes it's a little more challenging to find coursework in your major if you're in certain majors. And then most of you are actually trying to tackle a mix of varying requirements, and that's actually something I would suggest because that's going to give you a lot more flexibility. So flexibility is going to be important, but at the same time, having a set goal is also going to be helpful. But this also helps me to better get a sense of who you all are and what you're trying to do through study abroad. So I'm going to end the poll here, or at least stop sharing. And let's continue with our agenda. So let's talk a little bit about costs. What do we mean by costs? Cost of attendance and net cost. Um, so one of the things that you should be aware of is that when it comes to study abroad, sticker price is not usually what students will pay in terms of net cost. So your total cost of attendance is the total cost for your program. Your program budget, if you are living at UC Merced, if you're living on campus this year, it's quite high. It's about $39,000. It's quite high. If you're living off campus, it's probably closer to $29,000 or $30,000. But that is your essentially the sticker price, what you're looking at for the total cost, including your tuition, your books, your fees, your room and board, transportation, health, and a number of other miscellaneous costs. The same thing goes for study abroad. You may see a budget. So I pulled up an example here for the Czech Republic at about $31,700. This is your total cost of attendance, the sticker price. But let me tell you that very few students at UC Merced ever pay the sticker price, whether that's to study at UC Merced or through UC Merced, that may be for online classes or in-person classes. Very few students actually pay the sticker price. Most students end up paying the difference of their financial aid in grants and scholarships and what that cost of attendance is, and we call that the net cost. So essentially subtract from your total cost of attendance your grants and your scholarships, those monies that you never pay back. And that is what we call net cost. And so I pulled up an example of a student, we'll call this student L, and this student L paid $4,300 to participate in the fall term, compared to the sticker price of $31,700. So you kind of get a sense that there can be a really big difference between these two amounts. So I really suggest that you have a pretty good sense of what your cost of attendance is. Do you know what the price tag is for the same term here at UC Merced? So this kind of gives you an example of kind of where programs can kind of fall on a spectrum. So maybe programs on the lower end of the spectrum, lower cost of attendance might be a place like Taiwan or Thailand. Costs that kind of have maybe more intermediate costs of attendance, maybe in the UK outside of London. And then programs with much higher costs of attendance might be places like Tokyo. So this kind of gives you a sense. These aren't precise figures, and these numbers kind of change from year to year, and we're still waiting on budgets for this upcoming academic year. But this kind of gives you a sense of kind of where program budgets can kind of fall on the spectrum. So one of the things that you want to understand when it comes to study abroad is what are those costs covered by financial aid and what isn't. So covered costs are everything that's required in order for you to participate, the bare minimum costs. So that's going to include, when you study abroad, your tuition and fees, your room and board. It's going to include insurance and incidentals. It's going to include transportation, not just to get around between your housing and your classes, but also to get to and from your host country. So a single round trip ticket is estimated into your program budget. And these are all costs that are considered by financial aid. You might also see some pre-departure costs. All these things, if it's required in order for you to be able to participate, these costs are estimated and grouped together in your program budget. And then financial aid begins packaging you based on those. Some costs that may not be in there are going to be things like you want a second round trip ticket because you want to come back home for a family wedding or something like that. That's not going to be in there. If you're going to do some extra travel, if you're going to do some shopping, you're studying in Paris and they have great fashion, well, that's great, but that $300 dress or whatever, that leather bag, that's not going to be included by financial aid. So moving on, one of the things that students sometimes do or don't realize is that some are actually may be less affordable than semester for a lot of students. This depends on your particular financial aid scenario, but I would say that for the majority of UC Merced students, this will actually be the case. So when we take a look at kind of the composition of a student's budget compared to what they're going to be eligible for in aid, in funding, you'll see that for summer students, many times they're taking a look at parent loans and unmet need to fill gaps in their financial aid. And this becomes challenging. A lot of it has to do with just how financial aid is structured at UC Merced and the timing and the calendaring of financial aid. There's a lot kind of going on in the background in those financial aid calculations. Whereas for the semester, we tend to see a much smaller portion of the financial aid package show up as loans and very little show up as unmet need. This isn't the precise scenario for everyone, but I would say that this scenario fits the largest group of students at UC Merced. So some things that financial aid students need to actually know about summer. So a few things. There's very limited financial aid eligibility. There's very little Pell Grant eligibility, Bobcat Grant eligibility. Right now, there is no year-round Cal Grant, so students pretty much have no Cal Grant eligibility, with maybe very few exceptions. There are some options to fall back on loans, either Parent Plus loans or in some cases private loans. Those aren't usually things that we recommend in our office, but if that's what it takes for you to fulfill your goals, that may be an option to you. The other thing about summer is if you take a look, if you break down a program on a per unit basis, this tends to be the highest cost per unit when it comes to study abroad. And so you may find that you spend significantly more in order to study abroad in the summer compared to semester. You may be compelled to summer for one reason or another, but I would say for probably about 3/4 of UC Merced students, you'll spend more just because of these lower financial aid limits that we have for summer. So some of the reasons why semester and year kind of goes along with this, but some of the reasons why semester is usually more affordable to students is we tend to have full Pell Grant eligibility, full Cal Grant eligibility, and then quite a bit available in Bobcat grants. Bobcat grants for a lot of students actually enhance students' packages, and I would say in my experience over the last 10, 12 years at UC Merced, the differential in program budgets is actually greater, or the differential is usually made up mostly in Bobcat grant eligibility for the majority of our students. There are students who are exceptions to this. So if you maybe are on the low financial need end of the spectrum, some of that differential may be made up in Parent Plus loans. But if you tend not to get Parent Plus loans, I would expect to see more Bobcat grant eligibility for students. There's also a scholarship advantage for participating in longer term programs, semester and year-long programs. Some of the year-long benefits, think of all the advantages of semester, think of the lowest cost per unit when it comes to year-long study. On the whole, there are a few exceptions, but very few. But you also get access to additional scholarship monies that you wouldn't get even for a semester. So when it comes to study abroad, you might want to take a look at different study abroad providers. Now, most UC Merced students are going to do the UC Education Abroad program, but there are other programs out there, and the UC Education Abroad program might be a really good financial fit for some students, but not for every student in every scenario. And so I'm going to hopefully briefly go over those right now. So UCEAP tends to be the most cost-effective during the academic year for most students. So it's going to be eligible for nearly every category of financial aid. The one drawback is that summer for UCEAP tends to be the most pricey. especially on a cost per unit basis or cost per day basis if you want to break it down over time or over, on a calendar. So UCAP tends to be least the most disadvantaged in that way. UC Summer Abroad, this would be study abroad outside of a system-wide study abroad program, but a program that's administered by, say, UC Davis or UCLA. These tend to actually be the cheapest for summer because they can use almost every category of financial aid that UCAP can, but they tend to be cheaper. They are also going to be some of the shorter programs, but shorter programs also usually mean a higher cost per unit. But you can usually find, say, a 4-week program through Davis or UCLA or maybe another campus. IOP, so these would be any program for study abroad outside of the UC system. And we still work with students and support students to participate in these. Very few students actually do, but they can be pretty competitive in cost for summer. They supplement offerings where maybe UC Davis doesn't go or UCLA doesn't go or Berkeley doesn't go for summer. And they have some customizable options for students. They also have semester length programs, say EAP doesn't meet your needs in terms of your academic needs. One of the big disadvantages for IOP though is that you can't take Bobcat Grant with you. So if you get Bobcat Grant in any way, or if there's going to be a significant differential in your cost of attendance, this might be a significant disadvantage for students depending on your financial aid scenario. So when it comes to actually choosing a program, I really encourage students to think about programs in terms of fit. And there are different categories of fit, and I encourage students to take a look at how well a program fits you, because scholarships and even your finances will depend significantly on your fit. The other thing to think about is that when it comes to study abroad is an investment in your future, and so you want your program to fit your needs and your interests as best as possible, whether that's making progress towards your academic goals, your career goals, your professional development goals, or maybe there's something specific about a destination. Maybe it's cultural heritage, or the only, one of the few places where they speak a particular language or offer a particular field of study. Academically, you want to think about what's going to be a good fit for your major. Career-wise, do they offer an internship? Do they offer research, for or not for academic credit? These sorts of things. Personal development might be you really wanted to work on a language, or maybe you have a language requirement that you're trying to fulfill for your degree requirements. The more you consider these, the better able you'll be to articulate kind of your goals, what you want to get out of the program. That goes for scholarships, but that also goes for further down the line when you're thinking about your professional and career aspirations. So some other scholarship considerations. One thing that you want to keep in mind is that most scholarships actually reward students more for committing to a longer program term. So you can see this. A lot of scholarships don't share a lot of their statistics and data, but those that do, there's a clear advantage for participating in semesters. So you can see the award rate for a particular scholarship here. They're also rewarding students who go to more off the beaten path destinations, less traditional study abroad destinations. So you can see that this particular award was maybe not awarding at such a high rate for Europe, but rewarding students at a higher rate for Asia. And then at this point, I want you to, at this point, I really just want to kind of summarize some of the points that I talked about today. And then if you're interested, we can go deeper and I'll pick up questions in the chat as well. But really, I want you to kind of understand your costs, understand kind of how things work, what you need to consider when it comes to study abroad. So you want to understand your current costs, you want to know your program's costs. One thing that students should realize is that you pretty much cannot work while abroad. There are some exceptions, but I wouldn't anticipate that working abroad is really going to supplement your um, your study abroad costs, or to really support it. Maybe to do a little extra travel, maybe to do a little extra shopping, but it's not really going to tip the scale in terms of affordability for the vast majority of students. Second is consider your program choice. The term, the length matters. Providers will vary in terms of how affordable they are for different scenarios, for different students. We in the study abroad office were more than willing to sit down and take a look at your personal scenario and what is likely to work well for you, both timing wise and program wise. We want you to consider scholarships. We want you to maximize the potential based on looking at fit, term, and even study abroad destination. Is there a good study abroad destination that fits your academic and other goals when it comes to study abroad? And then we really want you to start planning proactively. So try to live within a budget now. Can you save a little bit now to be able to afford to study abroad later? Save for some of the fun expenses, because you'll find that you'll have friends and others who really want to travel, who really want to do some extra things, maybe a little extra shopping, maybe it's jet setting for a long weekend or vacation period while abroad to be able to see a nearby country or a different part of your host country. And then you may even be able to set aside some of your financial aid from maybe this academic year for your study abroad term coming up. If that's the case for you, you might be able to kind of set some of that aside, squirrel a little bit away for special study abroad expenses. And so at this point, I really want to leave open some time for questions. You can also see some resources here on this final slide. But please feel free to drop any questions in the chat or to unmute yourself if you want, and I will stop the recording.